Hey listeners, it's AZ, and this is episode 131, and my guest today is Dr. Joel Billings. He is an assistant professor at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, and he is an expert in sleep. And we talked a lot about firefighter sleep. We talked about the process of sleep and the sleep-wake cycles. We talked about shift schedules, and we talked about the impact of those alerting systems, those tones on our cardiovascular system. He gave some great tips for consideration from both an administrative standpoint, all the way down from the chief to the individual firefighter. You are going to learn so much in this episode, and I'm so glad that he was a guest. As always, please give us a rating and a review and share the podcast. Have a great day.
Thank you for joining me on the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, AZ. I find the research and resources and then provide the fire service with the so what, now what, to ensure the health and well-being of every member of our profession. Together, let's thrive.
So, Casual Friday at the Billings residence. I love it.
Yes. Day after Halloween. Do you have a good Halloween?
Oh, I don't really do Halloween.
No Halloween?
I hide. I'm in a new subdivision, so nobody was like trick-or-treating, so that's good.
Oh, okay. Yeah, where we're at, there's quite a few kids that stopped by, so we had a busy night yesterday.
Did you dress up?
I do have a few costumes. Yes, I was all skeleton. I was a skeleton person yesterday.
That's amazing. Very good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor today to have the one, the only Dr. Joel Billings on the show. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
We're going to talk about, I'm sure, a lot of different stuff, but one of my favorite topics, near and so dear to my heart, sleep. I am just a lover of sleep.
Me too.
Okay. Because sometimes, like, people study things that they aren't even really, like, that passionate about in terms of doing it themselves. Now, before we get too far into the weeds and introducing all that stuff, are you a good sleeper?
So there are things that I tend to struggle with. Yes. So there are, and that's it brings into another topic of like categorizing a firefighter as either a good sleeper or poor sleeper. And we all have good nights and we all have bad nights. And so for the most nights, for me, myself, I do sleep good, but I do make that as an investment. There are other times that aren't so good at sleeping, and I know exactly the cause in terms of for myself that for that particular night, I was either not strong enough to say no or to go to bed, start my routine, and then sleep, of course, was terrible that night. So I do get good and then bad sleep.
Well, I cannot wait to dig into all of that good stuff. But first, I'm a very, very, very lazy podcast host, which makes my guests introduce themselves by answering 3 questions. Are you ready for question 1?
Sure.
Who is, and you can answer this any way you want to, Dr. Joel Billings?
Okay. So I am an assistant professor at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, and I started there in 2019. I'm also the program chair for the Bachelor of Science in Emergency Services undergraduate program. And I also have a research agenda that focuses all on firefighter sleep and health. So there's kind of 3 areas within that of sleep, shift schedules, and this new area of alerting systems that we're finding that's may have a startle impact and also impact on cardiovascular response for firefighters.
I'm so excited to talk about all of those things. Oh my gosh. What sets your soul on fire?
Let's see. I think the research had an impact. So in most, well, I don't say most, but in a lot of other fields, research in terms of academia sits in a journal published in a peer-reviewed or non-peer-reviewed journal, and people have to pay to access it. And so here in the fire service, what's great is that you have a population that wants and needs that research. And so a lot of time we have to make an extra effort to bridge that gap from the journal or a peer academic forum to the practitioner side. And that's really, I think, what makes my interest in sleep and in this topic, and especially in the fire service, more relevant, is that my background as a volunteer firefighter and EMT up in Michigan is that I see or notice kind of both sides of the spectrum. So looking at what career firefighters experience in a variety of situations, and then having that academic training to be able to talk the talk and then also walk the walk, and then bridge that with having impactful evidence for the fire service to make that change. So what kind of fuels me is that the research is being used, and I have happened to pick a topic that is now being in demand. So that's ever more motivating to continue that research, because not a lot of people in this particular area in terms of sleep that can grow and make an impact. So we're fostering a group of people, and now we're starting to see some positive change from the research. So that's really exciting.
It is exciting, and I love, because you do such a good job bridging the gap. I'm always so disappointed when I go to a conference and the end user is like the target audience, and then the people that are speaking are just speaking so at a level that the end user doesn't care. So I love that.
And there are definitely conferences that I go to that are higher level, like the main sleep conference, and that's usually in the summertime in June. That's more of the the scientific. You got to have your methodology pretty sound for these group of audience, because they're going to pull that apart. In comparison to a fire conference, that's very different. No one wants to hear your methods. They want to see the results first, and then let's talk about them. So my format to presentations is very different, and in fact I take a very informal and walk down the aisle and ask people to interrupt me, because it's I'm here for them, and so I want to make sure that I tailor my presentation and answer their questions more than me getting out what I think that they want to hear.
Thank you so much for doing that. And the final question is, you kind of answered it already, but I want to hear, how are you changing the world?
I think through the research, and then taking that extra step of connecting it with people. So I work very closely with NDRI, Sarah Janke, and those wonderful folks, and Brittany. And so I think with the effort of Science Alliance, connecting with sleep, we are starting to not just have a foster community of people that are engaged in sleep, but having products to be able to deliver to various levels within the fire service that can make an impact. So from the fire chief down to the individual firefighter, there are things that each level can do to help optimize sleep health.
Yes.
And I'm sure we'll talk about a little of those in this podcast.
Oh, yes, we will. Now, in your bio, you list your research in this order: sleep process and sleep wake cycles, shift schedules, and then cardiovascular and sleep impacts on the alerting system. Is that a logical order in which to dive into your research? I'm assuming it is.
Yeah, and I think that was the progression that my research has taken. So first, what I need to do is to understand what is happening in the world of sleep for firefighters. So that's sleep process. So that's the sleep wake cycle, when they go to bed, when they get out of bed, day by day throughout their schedule. And so that's why the earlier studies, we had firefighters follow the department's schedule. And that's obviously going to be very different than what a firefighter works, because there's overtime or mandatory overtime, swapping shifts, and vacation leave, which deviates that schedule quite a bit. So here you want to now compare apples to oranges, and it's completely different. And so understanding at the basic level what firefighters sleep, how they sleep, where they sleep is the important part. In a lot of the research, you'll just see an overall average. So, oh, that's 6 hours. Well, what does that mean? Because there are sleeps at home, at the station, and if there's a firefighter that rotates stations frequently, they can have a very different sleep environment that produces a very different set of sleep parameters. And sleep parameters is total sleep duration, sleep efficiency, so how well they're sleeping while they're sleeping, number of interruptions, and that's kind of largely due to calls at a particular station versus one or the other. So there's a lot of factors that go into trying to understand sleep before we even get into like the organizational impacts on sleep, which is in its own separate category of calls and policies and comfort, scheduling, sleeping quarters, all that stuff. Then we get into the alerting system, and so that's a newer area that we're focusing on, looking at specifically looking at a piece of equipment that is sort of breaking tradition on the alarm system. So here we're able to kind of see in the data of when a firefighter gets a call. Most of the time at night, in the data that we've collected so far, it's at a normal heart rate, maybe 60s on average, and then it jumps into tachycardia within that minute, and almost within 30 seconds. So here the question is, does that jump without really doing anything physically, just laying in bed, or those first few seconds getting out of bed, does that over time add to the risk for cardiovascular disease or a heart attack or some type of line of duty death down the road? And so this newer system is designed to have a more startle response, with a vibration on a wrist-like watch device. So you'll get notified that versus the bell, and we're seeing how that impacts heart rate response as well as subjective quality and satisfaction responses. So we're very very early into that research, but we just finished up a phase 1 clinical trial, and hopefully are going to go for a phase 2 study.
And I feel like I would much prefer to be awakened by a small vibration on my wrist as opposed to the heart saver tones, which never felt like they were saving my heart at all.
Yeah, I mean, there's various ways to alert someone, and in the fire service, there's a couple of different ways. Just the old school mechanical bell, and that's what department that one of the departments that we looked at had that klaxon bell, and so very loud right above a bedroom. So I feel bad for the people that sleep in that particular bedroom. But then there are electronic tones, there's ramp up tones, there's LED lights, red lights, and so there's lots of ways that you can wake someone up. But the example that I use is from the ice bucket challenge, a bucket of ice water thrown on someone to wake them up versus a mother's gentle awakening. Hey, time to get up. And so that would probably have a different response. And even cell phones now have a ramp up tone for their alarm clock. And so I notice a very different tone. And if you're curious about it, you can pick the most annoying cell phone alarm clock tone, set that up, try it one night, wake up to that one, and then the next morning set a different tone, and then have the ramp up feature turned on, and you'll see the difference, what that does. So we're trying to mimic that and test and see how effective that is in the fire service.
You just transported me back to being in like high school, being a teenager, and there were 2 different ways that I would get awakened. Either my dad would come wake me up, which was door flung open, lights come on, and yelling, "Get up!" Or, which was much better, my brother, who would tiptoe in, touch me gently, and say, "Net, wake up." So,
yes, yep,
totally different experiences.
Yep, and still, you want the response of alertness. That's one thing that you don't want to sacrifice on. But I think you could probably achieve that certainly within a few seconds, without having that startle impact. Because over time, one time is not a big deal, but it probably would not be a big deal over time, and then throughout one's career, is that a contributing factor to line of duty deaths? And we just don't know yet.
All we know is we do not want Randy Zapp waking us up for anything. So let's go back to your sleep process and your sleep wake cycles research. I have had firefighters, and I've experienced this myself. You go in for a shift, you don't have any calls all night, but yet you wake up in the morning and you just feel rotten anyway. So let's dig into why that might be.
Yeah, so I guess I'll preface that there are going to be individual differences throughout the entire U.S. Fire Service. So where someone is at a lower call volume station, can't sleep, and then there are some people that are at a very busy station that even though they get a couple hours, still feel energetic and ready. Those are the maybe the outliers, but there are individual differences to what sleep need and comfort and et cetera. So for those that, and I also hear it on both sides where firefighters come to work to sleep, especially those that have maybe newborn children at home. And then there are those that can't sleep at work and go home to sleep. So it's really, that's what makes it so, interesting and also quite complicated. Because everyone has their own preferences in sleep and their sleep environment, et cetera. So for those that maybe don't have a high call volume and that still feels groggy, poor sleep, or hey, I slept 8 hours, but yet I'm still checking that box of I had poor sleep yesterday, then there's something that we're not measuring yet that's evident, obviously, if they're saying that they have poor sleep quality. It could be ruminating or pre-bed anxiety, or also just anticipating a call coming in that makes firefighters report light sleep, which I often hear quite a bit from those that aren't, or especially those that transfer or rotate from a high call volume station to a lower call volume station, of them anticipating a call coming in. I wonder if they are transferring and then after say a few weeks, if it starts to normalize out. I don't know. That's a good question to have, which would help suggest maybe rotating people aren't the best strategy to do in terms of sleep or productive sleep.
And I think that we're making the turn a little bit, but I've heard this during my career for sure. We don't pay you to sleep, so we're not really concerned about your bed or the darkness or the tone. We don't pay you to sleep. But there's definitely some impact to the human body when we're not sleeping well. And I think if we really looked at it, there's some impact to the department as well. What do you think?
Sure, yeah. And there's impact to the community too. So I mean, it's going to come back to the community. But so the we don't pay you to sleep, that's whoever says that's not going to like my top 3 recommendations, because naps is number 2 recommendation. But so this kind of gets into the shift schedules of the 24-hour versus non-24-hour scheduling systems. And if the community wants 24/7 coverage, then someone's got to be there 24/7 or be ready to respond 24/7. And most of the time, calls happen in career departments frequently enough where it makes sense to just have people at the station. So someone's there, and the question is, what are we doing in terms of work duration? Do we keep them there for 24 hours? Do we keep them there for 12 hours, 48 hours, etc.? That gets into a scheduling structure, and there are quite a few different factors when considering scheduling systems. So it's the shift duration, 12, 24, 48, 72, etc. The off time, so how much duration they have not at work. Which, if it's a non-24 scheduling system, is it a forward rotation, so your afternoon shift, now your evening shift, or is it a backward, so from evening to afternoon? And there's all science behind this. How frequently they rotate, or do they rotate? So are you just permanently night worker, and that's when you do your work, so you're not sleeping, you're just always working nights? And then the speed of the rotation or the change. So every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks. So there's a lot of factors that go into that issue. I've always heard in terms of the 24 schedules versus the 48 or I'm sorry, the non-24 is that there are savings on shift switch swaps or shift trade, not trades, at shift change time. Whether or not it makes sense to have it at one time during the day so that you're not paying people overtime, especially if it's a busy time at that change. And then also truck checks, replacing people turnout, etc., that it makes it more economically feasible to have a one change time per 24 hours. So that's a labor question, but in general, and going back to your question of we're paying people to sleep. Firefighters in general have a sleep duration that is less than the national recommendation from the National Sleep Foundation of like 5 to 6 hours usually for firefighters in general. So firefighters need sleep.
Yeah. Hey, you mentioned your top 3 tips and you said nap is number 2. What are the other 3 just out of other 2 out of curiosity?
Yes. So the one top one, and there's 4, but the 4th one we don't yet have data for, but I'll talk about that too. The first one is the scheduling systems. So abandoning or changing scheduling systems from the repeated on schedules. Those ones basically don't allow you to have enough recovery time between shifts. So, for example, the Kelly schedule, and that has a few other names, Berkeley, Modified Detroit, 3-4 schedule. So it's a 9-day tour, on, off, on, and then four days off. So in that particular schedule, firefighters go 5 days without having, or before they have that 4-day block off. So those 5 days are commute days, meaning that each day you're not going to be able to sleep in if you wanted to. And one of the questions or common questions that maybe someone asks, well, why don't you just go to bed earlier? Well, that's easier said than done. And circadian science, sleep medicine would show, and my data also shows us that people have a hard time falling asleep earlier than their circadian rhythm or normal sleep pattern. It's easier to wake up later or get up earlier with the use of our magical devices of cell phone, right? Those alarms wake us up and get us out of bed. So you're easier to change the sleep offset time, but it's very difficult to change the time that you get into bed. For those that do go into bed a little bit earlier, we typically see more of a longer sleep latency, so the time it takes you to fall asleep. So they're basically tossing and turning, trying to sleep, get their body to, oh, come on, go to bed earlier, and that doesn't work. So that eventually can cause further problems of you just tossing and turning and associating your bed with non-sleep. So that's my first recommendation, is to maybe abandon those schedules that have a quick return rotation. The second one is naps. So, like I said, in general, firefighters need sleep. They're sleep deprived, and with naps, now that gets into the community debate of now I'm paying you to nap on shift. Like I said, most firefighters need sleep. Naps, use them appropriately and responsibly are the 2 key terms. So, timing and duration are important. So you don't want to take a nap at like 9 o'clock at night, because then that's going to throw off your main sleep episode. And then also the duration of either a 20-minute quick nap or cat nap, or a duration of maybe 90 minutes, basically to progress through one cycle. That's a little bit harder because you don't know if a call is going to come in. And if it does while you're in deep sleep, you're going to feel those symptoms of sleep inertia, which is that grogginess for a little bit. That's my second recommendation. Third recommendation, and I hear this quite often, and then I'm surprised that a lot of departments still have this, is a wake up bell or a notification. And those some of them go off at 6 o'clock in the morning, some of them go off at 7, and those should be abandoned and tossed out. It's a bad practice, and it's not one that needs to be used anymore. I was on a call, maybe it's now a month ago or 2 months ago, with the department, and they were talking about having this the wake up call. And after the conversation, I said, okay, let me reword it to you a little bit different, and think about like the from the lawyer's perspective or a liability perspective. I said, so people need sleep because they're physically sleeping in the sleeping quarters, right? You don't need them. You don't need anything from them, because in this case, that particular department, everything was done the night before. So they just, once they woke up, they went home. So you don't need anything from them. And the people that are coming on shift don't need that room. They made their beds later in the afternoon, so they didn't need that room. So you know that they need sleep. You don't need anything from them, and no one's going to use that room. So then why are you forcing them to wake up, sleep deprived, because they obviously need sleep, and then forcing them in a vehicle to drive home?
Bingo.
So just reflect on that question for a second. Why are you forcing them to wake up, sleep deprived, and then forcing them to get in a vehicle and drive home? So at what point does that risk matter to a fire department? It's more of a matter of when an accident's going to occur, of someone that's sleep deprived and getting in a vehicle and driving home. So that would be my question, or top 3 recommendations. And that last one's a liability.
Okay. And so the fourth that you don't have data for, is it the liability?
No. So the fourth, I mean, it basically addresses a little bit of all 3 of those, and that's shift start time. And so through the data that I looked at during my dissertation and looking at sleep process night by night throughout these schedules, we could see that certain days that firefighters had poor sleep, and it corresponded to commute days. So the what's interesting about looking at that data is that we realized that, or had initially thought, once those 4 days, or you're done with the tour, you had your home days, and you're ready to start a new tour, you're refreshed, well recovered, you're ready to go. And that was not the case at all. It was the complete opposite. So firefighters on that morning of the commute had least amount of sleep in this sample compared to, even factoring in calls and whatnot at the station, had their least amount of sleep. Subsequently, we looked at sleepiness during that next afternoon and saw that increase. So not only did they wake up sleep deprived, commute to work, but then had their least amount of or lower performance, higher sleepiness during that afternoon. So it's very opposite of what we had initially thought would happen, is that they were well recovered, ready to go. No, opposite. They were sleep deprived and then subsequently had lower performance that afternoon. We looked at why that may be the case, and that relationship was very similar to their sleep offset. So it was tied to when they woke up early to prepare to go to work and commute in, and then the light bulb clicked. And I mean, it makes sense, right? When you don't get sleep, so how well you slept last night. If you didn't sleep great because you were out trick-or-treating and eating a bunch of candy and you stayed up till 2 o'clock in the morning, how well do you feel right now? You're probably a little tired, right? And so that's common sense. But to look at that day by day in the scheduling, and now we can see that it corresponds to commute days, we thought, okay, this is something that we need to look at. So that particular department had a shift start time at 7 a.m. And so the question is, if we push that or delay that shift start time to a time that allowed you to wake up consistently the same time each day, right? So at home, I think they woke up at 7:30. So if you were able to wake up at 7:30 on a work day and then commute and go in, what would that do to your sleep? And we would say that it would probably have a more consistent or normalized sleep pattern, which remains like one of the number one recommendations for sleep health. Which would mean that firefighters now go to work well rested. In the afternoon, they would have better performance, and et cetera. We're back on track to how it should be. So that's the open question that we don't have data on yet. We are in a department testing that has shifted shift start time from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. and I have a box of devices right next to me of the follow-up data. So we'll look at sleep night by night and see how or if it improved.
And is that San Antonio fire that you're working with?
No, this is Roswell, Georgia.
Okay.
Fire.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, San Antonio has an 11 a.m. shift change, and they love it.
Okay, yeah. I know there's another one. Austin has a noon. So the idea of the shift, or an ideal shift start time, I think it's going to be one of those questions that is dependent on the department.
Yeah.
So it's going to be, what's the best time for your particular department? And I say that because there are maybe metropolitan departments that have a very busy rush hour. And so if you're waking up now later and now you're stuck in rush hour for 3 hours, it means you've got to wake up at the same time and then just be stuck in rush hour. And that's not what we want. We want ideally a start time that allows you to wake up, consistent each day, and then get to work at a reasonable time, but not too late where now you're kind of just like, what do I got to do for 2 hours? And that's really not much to do anything around the house, and so I'm just wasting time. You don't want that, because then that's probably piss people off.
And now that you said Austin, Austin, it is Austin, not San Antonio. Okay, so we know that the Kelly isn't so great. What's better?
Well, that's a good question, and unfortunately, that's going to be like depending on your department's how busy they are, how many people they have, stations, etc. Because it comes down to the individual call volume or burden, and burden is really two variables. So I say call volume as in like the frequency, like the count. But there was also the duration. So those that transport and don't transport have very different durations for a call. So a call burden, if we say as a composite variable, combines those two. So a department could have very different call burdens, and then that would spark maybe a different conversation of a different scheduling system. So most departments will probably tailor to the most busiest, as a safeguard, because you don't want to say work 48 hours and one station is having 8 or 9 calls during the night. That's not going to be safe.
I came from a 24-48 schedule, and I think a lot of people were interested in going to a 48-96.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for me, what it would come down to, because it wasn't a tremendously busy department, but it was also a department where we like to make ourselves busy with extra tasks.
Sure.
And so I think for that department in particular, it would have come down to, can we then say that second day is sort of our easy day? It's, we already did our training, we already did our whatever. Yeah. Can we coast on the second day?
Yeah, and I hear that quite a bit, where either the second day or the first day, depending on, like for example, shift start time, is either the light or the work day, and then sort of the rest day, or the carryover day. If they had a busy first day, then they can rest on the second day and do some minimal tasks. That's more of department policy on what they do. And in most departments that do go to the 4096, I often hear that there are policies or contingencies that are put in place that allows for correction if they have a busier first night, or an unusually busy first night. In fact, the local department here, when they switched over, had some of those policies that if there are busy, then guys can sleep in. They can push work to the next shift, etc. So it's not as if it's a true duplication of a 24-hour shift for most of the departments that go on that 48 hours. However, there is the concern of that rare event or busier stations of having multiple calls during the night that detracts from sleep. Because if you don't get sleep, it's only a matter of bad things are going to happen. And so if historically that station is very busy, 48 is probably not going to be the best for that. And so that brings up another question of, maybe flexible scheduling. And I think that there's a couple departments that do some type of flexible scheduling. We'll have two different shift schedules. Maybe busier stations work something different, and less busy works a different schedule. Or they have more personnel during busier times to account for that. So there are different ways to handle it. It just picking a particular schedule for a department is a very personalized question for them.
I know that there are a few departments that have gone to 24/72, which sounds beautiful and delicious to me. Any downfalls with that one?
No, so there are a couple. Well, I guess the concerns that I've heard is the what's the word? Oh, I'm forgetting the word, but the load factor. Is that the right word? Basically, where you have your number of a crew on a typical shift, and so if there are sick people, they can pull from that. So some departments that have gone to 72 will reduce that amount, and so now they're basically operating at bare bones on a 24/72. So that's probably the only concern on that part of okay, you're stretching yourself too thin. I've heard departments that have gone to the 24/72 by only hiring 2 positions because they were able to save on overtime. So there are ways. Obviously, the fire service in general has a recruitment issue. And so being able to offer these schedules, especially for those that maybe want more time off, new families and so forth, may be an advantage for them. There are some benefits of the 24/72. It basically combines both the 24/48 and the 48/96 with sufficient time off compared to a workday. And those that do work a 48 hour shift, they're able to still have some time off before they start that new shift. And so that can be very an advantage for the 24/72.
I do think, though, that we're our own worst enemy because we all have our extra jobs. Some of us work beside fire department and EMS, whatever, teaching, whatever we're doing. How do we convey this message to the firefighters? Like, my dudes, you have got to prioritize your sleep. How do we get that message out?
Yeah. So, I mean, second jobs, overtime, right? And even those that have kids view that as a second job. So it's really taking whatever's taking you away from needed rest and recovery and obviously sleep. So the human body is pretty resilient. So that's more of a personalized question as well of how much you can do on the offside. There are not few departments. I don't know of many departments that have a lot of recommendations for sleep guidance in their department. And there's not necessarily a standard wide or national guidance on, hey, you must not work 8 hours before going to work. That'd be obviously a department specific policy. So it's tricky, but probably education is going to be the number one thing, and we're seeing that more with departments, especially after COVID. Mental wellness has increased. A lot of stigmas have broke, and sleep is now a hot topic in the fire service. So education is probably the number one thing that I would recommend to encourage people to not overdo themselves, see what they can do reasonably, as well as financially, because obviously that's probably the main concern, and then go from there.
I'm not above using scare tactics myself in order to educate people.
Yep.
So let's talk about some scare tactics. Like, what can happen when you don't get enough sleep, gentlemen?
Yeah. So there's both acute and chronic. So I most presentations I start with, people probably hear me talk about pillars of health, and that's physical activity, diet, mental well-being, and sleep. So out of those 4 things, sleep is really the only one that has very acute effects in terms of accident injury. So you can go a meal without eating. I mean, you'll feel hungry, right? It's not going to kill you, right? But sleep a night without sleep, that could. You could fall asleep at the wheel. Unfortunately, we just saw that a couple months ago, that a fire crew fell asleep at the wheel and got in an accident. And there are a lot of instances of that. If you just type in EMS sleep deprivation into Google, you'll find a handful of or several handfuls of cases where that's the situation. So there are the scare tactics. Number one is the alertness that decreases. There are the infamous studies that not the infamous, the two classical studies on alcohol intoxication equivalent to, being awake for 17 hours and 24 hours. And that's basically you're intoxicated. We probably need not say any more other than that. So you're going to act like you're intoxicated, and that's slow judgment. Cognitive thinking is delayed, reaction time is delayed, and that's going to end into some type of accident. There are medical and nursing studies that show this very clearly on injuring patients and also killing patients. In addition to the hospital worker itself of injury and accident. So there's lots of acute effects of sleep deprivation over time, and that's where we haven't, in terms of fire service, haven't done a lot of longitudinal studies over time of looking at sleep. But in the general sleep medicine, it is a spider web of relationships to obesity, cardiovascular disease, cancer, depressed immune system, and that could further exacerbate COVID, for example, and cancer. And then of course physical health as well. So there's a myriad of relationships that sleep has, and it's a foundational layer.
And I always just love to bring up that study at the University of Chicago where they looked at the sleep deprivation and the testosterone after only 5 days. So men seem to listen when we talk about testosterone.
Yeah, and that's one of the metrics that we're looking to at the study for the shift start time. At a year mark, we'll look at their annual medical evaluations, and that's one of the measures that we'll see if that has changed.
I will be interested.
Yes.
Everyone stay tuned. Okay, so I want to dig are you good on time?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, let's dig into a little bit more of your cardiovascular impacts on your alerting systems, and then, kind of like the physiology of that, and then just a little bit more on that system that you were talking about.
Yeah, so the data's not analyzed yet, so I can't speak too much of the data, but the theory is to reduce the delta in maximum heart rate at a certain time. So, and this is really difficult to try to implement in a field study. A laboratory would be fine. I mean, you just monitor someone and then shock them essentially, either with the alarm or with the newer device. Because in the field, we want to stop it right before dispatch gives them any information. Because from there, you'll be able to tell, if it's medical versus fire, and that already will have a very different response, right? So basically, it's just trying to isolate it to the alarm notification type, and that was tricky to do. So based on that, we had a couple issues with equipment, and the next study we're going to try to implement a more sophisticated way to assess that with a wrist device that's going to look at heart rate, cardiac rhythm. It also have skin temperature, and I believe pulse ox as well. So it'll have a lot more measures that hopefully we could look at second by second after the alarm notification. So we'll get there. But yeah, so the system called EaseAlert has a wearable technology that is connected into their CAD computer system that will bypass basically the bell. And so that will activate, and then dispatch will give their information over the speaker just as normal. So it's just replacing that the bell. So what we've seen looking at the before data, because I've presented a few of the images in a couple of presentations, just see a, flat line basically at night, and then you could tell exactly when the bell came. And most everyone went into tachycardia within the minute, as I mentioned before. And so we were then looking at, EasyAlert was implemented. We looked at the data, and in a couple of cases, we see the exact same thing. So we're like, okay, well, what's going on? What we then looked at was the change in heart rate before and after, because people are going to have, depending on their situation, if they're up and around moving, because we looked at day calls and night calls. If they were working out, for example, or say running, if they were running right before the bell came in, and then after the bell came in, then they stopped running, likely heart rate may decrease in that case. And we did see that in a couple people. So what we looked at then was the change in heart rate. And what we see is that the change with the EasyAlert device may have a lower change compared to the traditional system, which means better response. So means that the heart rate's not getting so high so quickly with the newer technology. So it's very early into that technology, and we just looked at heart rate data so far.
And I'm almost thinking like, yes, this is great, but the speaker's still speaking. What if we could just wake up the people that need to go on the call, and then the call's right on their wrist, and then they just get up and go?
Yeah, so that is a really good recommendation, and I think that they've heard that a lot of having screen, because there are apps that and I forget the common app, but basically it's the same situation where the call data will pop up on their app and be able to read it that way versus having it on a speaker or system. So there's ways to be able to pull that data in. And then you're talking about individualizing the calls. That system is set up to basically alert the actual firefighter versus a station. And there are also other systems that you program within a particular sleeping quarter. So your room, you could program, I'm on engine 1, and then that room will only activate if engine 1 gets toned out. So ideally, that's the case that you want to be, is to have that individual alert so that you're not waking up anybody else. Unfortunately, I like to reference, maybe 10 years ago now, when I was collecting data for my master's thesis, one person in a department slept through a call. And so as a result, the fire chiefs went to an open wide system for all calls 24/7. So in this department, I think there was it was either 70 to 100 firefighters, so medium size in Oklahoma, and 4 stations. And so everyone woke up for every call, and it was on average, that year was about 5,000 calls. So you can imagine that that probably was who a lot of people did not like that, and it'd go against the science. So I think there's probably a different way to reprimand or punish someone that way, but either way, they're telling you that they need sleep. So that's basically a symptom.
I do love it when the science makes the argument for us.
Yeah,
that's beautiful.
Yeah. So yeah, having individual alerts is something that we would recommend. Of course, during the daytime, if people want to, hear traffic, there are systems that have, night mode versus day mode. And so calls can come through the station and so forth, or you have it on your phone that you can monitor it that way. So I like the systems that you're able to customize to individual firefighter preference. So if they want to receive calls, they have it on their phone or a different way. And if they don't, they're not bothered by it.
I love it.
Makes sense, right?
I love it. Okay, so we had Joel's top 3/4 tips for firefighter sleep, fire department sleep. What are your top tips for just sleep in general?
Yeah, so those would be like the organization tips. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are different levels to having interventions or best practices, whatever word you want to call it. So the fire chief level, so that's administration policy. There is the health and safety officer, right? So the champion in the fire service. or the fire department, there is the company officer. So that's like the station officer level, the subculture, right? You can really rally your troops. Let's maybe not play video games at 4 a.m. Let's, sometimes you got to be told what to do, unfortunately, and maybe that person could be a champion in that area. And then it all comes down to the individual firefighter. So there's really 4 levels of things in the fire department that can have areas to optimize sleep health. At the individual level, or there are let me take a neck. Well, let me focus on the fire chief. If you want me to walk through some of those, I can.
Yes, let's do it.
So at the station level, there are also sleeping quarter environment, and so we presented at the Fire Station Design Symposium just this past September. And so from basically low-hanging fruit to small renovations to building a new fire station, there are things that the department can do to help optimize sleep health. And so that was like station sleeping quarter placement within a station. Maybe not next to like the side where it's a busy intersection or traffic. And one of the departments I went, there was the station was located right next to train tracks, and they had a train that came by every 45 minutes at night every day. And so that, as you could see, would obviously be very destructive to sleep. I don't know if there's going to be a location within that station that would be good enough where you're not going to hear any type of station or train horn. But having the sleeping quarters isolated from internal and external noises, so away from the bay, but also away from maybe a busy street, ideal. So that's big item if you're in the station design of a new building. Also, individual units. That way, people can have preference to their sleep needs, because everyone's going to have something different. Sleep need or preference, like mattress quality, like Sleep Number versus a box spring from the dollar store. That's not going to work. And what is it? South Metro, I believe, had invested in Sleep Numbers for a number of their firefighters. Great investment. I mean, sleep is an investment. The fire service in general is an investment industry. And so those, if a sleeping quarters used or rooms used by 3 people at least, everyone may have a different preference on their ideal number. So that basically eliminates that from the question, because they can adjust the bed to their liking. Great idea. But again, it's costly. Then there are basically what we're doing is addressing the senses. So light, noise, smell, temperature, feeling, and so forth. So if you address the senses in sleeping environment, then you're able to customize your particular room. And you can have noise insulation from at the door level, walls, ceiling, floor. There's even insulation for the floor, believe it or not. Light, same thing, eliminating external light, so blackout shades, etc. They make strips for the bottom inch of the door. So if you have a tile hallway and then the room is maybe commercial grade carpet, you're probably going to see some type of gap under the door. And there's a filler strip that can help with light and as well as noise. Lighting, changing from the fluorescent bulbs to maybe soft white or LED red bulbs, especially at night. So if there's like a day mode versus a night mode, you don't need all the lights on the station, but maybe one light to get to the bathroom, and same thing within the bathroom at night to have more of a soft white. Basically, you're trying to not suppress melatonin release if you get up to go to the bathroom. So those are some minor ones for like the station design from the administrative standpoint of building a new station. The health and safety officer, and we get into like peer training, coaches training, that really can be I say champion, a leader in that culture of a fire department. And most of the time when I speak to people at the department, I get connected with the health and safety officer of that is really interested in improving sleep health for their firefighters. So they could be a great resource of training material and helping to disseminate policies and teach on policies of teaching the why, not just what to do. Station officer has a big role because they're right there, and they could. And I said earlier the example of playing video games till 4:00, and I hear that all the time. And so the role that you could have as a station officer to make positive change, impacting your firefighters, is huge. And so creating that subculture, and as a healthy subculture, and it's not just sleep. It's eating, having a nutritional programs. Excuse me. So the nutrition, diet, having a physical fitness program, or really embracing it, because Chief's not going to come around all the time and be able to see what exactly you're doing. So creating a good routine and structure of a subculture is going to be really good. Then of course the individual firefighter. So what they could do to improve sleep for themselves. There are some big top ones, and the very number one is having a good routine set, one that carries from home to work. And if you have if you rotate multiple stations, you have to have it there as well. So it's one that at this time I'm starting to wind down. Of course, if calls come in and stuff like that, you have to figure that out. But your wind down procedure, okay, I'm going to start to limit screen time, social media, get out of social media, coffee, caffeine, any stimulants that you're taking, reducing those at a certain time, and winding down to be in a healthy state to go to bed. And that will also carry into some of the things that within the sleeping room that you have, either external noise or light. You want to control that, your ideal temperature, if there are adjustable temperatures in that particular room, having that set to your preference, and basically setting up a room that you're going to walk into and you're going to sleep. And also only go into that room when you're sleeping. That way, every time you go into the room, you know exactly what to do. Your mind unconsciously connects those two, and so when you go into the room, it's sleeping. So those are the few things that I would recommend at the individual level. I'll give you a little teaser. We will have at the end of the FEMA Early Career Grant on sleep, a new addition to the International Association of Fire Chiefs 2007 Sleep Deprivation Report. We'll have a second edition to that. So that's going to be in 2 years. They'll have guidance for all 4 of those levels, substantial guidance. And that not just educational material, but practical, implementable ideas at those various levels.
I cannot wait.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, I think we beat this up. I think we gave them the so what, now what. I think that this was amazing. Do you have a final thought? Sage advice.
Don't neglect sleep. And I know it's easier said than done, but we are very comfortable with becoming uncomfortable. And so just because you're comfortable with that doesn't mean I get terrible sleep all the time. Don't become comfortable with that statement. There are things that you can do, minor little things. And if you are in that category, maybe seeing a sleep doctor would be your first thing to go to and see if, hey, is there something that's wrong or that needs a little bit more attention, and getting some input from a qualified medical professional. So that probably would be my sign off, I suppose.
Okay, but there's one more question, and I do not know the answer to this. Do you guys have a dog?
We do, yeah.
Okay, I got to talk about your dog. Tell me about your dog.
His name is Loki. He was marked as a German Shepherd at the Oklahoma City Animal Shelter. He is not primarily German Shepherd. He does look like it, but we had one of those DNA tests done on him, and he's 35% Siberian Husky. Then American Pit Bull Terrier, then German Shepherd, and then 2 breeds of pointers. So he's a skinnier, lighter dog, but he does have the saddleback look.
I bet he's so handsome. And
Yeah.
so, does he sleep with you?
He sleeps in our room, but not in our bed.
Okay. And do you have advice about your dog sleeping with you? Any data on that?
Yeah. So when we in it's interesting you said, because we had a question at the FEMA meeting this last month now. Then someone asked me, "Hey, do you ask about whether or not dogs sleep in the same room?" And before I didn't. I just had whether you slept with someone, whether they were in the same bed or in separate beds in the same room. If you had kids that were sleeping in the same room or in the same bed, except I get into that detail, but I never asked about pets. And I do now. It is included. But one time when we were traveling up to Michigan for the holidays, we stopped at a hotel and he slept in the bed. And Loki's only 55 pounds. He makes a small footprint and he curls up like a little donut. He like almost kicked me out of bed. And so that's small in a king size bed. And so me, my wife, and the dog, and here I was struggling to find any, space in the bed to sleep. So it can be a problem for some. Those that when he's in his bed in the room, he's quiet. He doesn't disturb us at all. But I suppose for some it could be a problem. So I actually incorporated on my this question for the FEMA grant survey.
Yay.
Yep.
Well, Joel, I was looking forward to this conversation. Ever since we scheduled it, it has been such a pleasure to catch up with you again. And we're practically neighbors, so we should probably get lunch someday or something.
Yes. And more, maybe do these more often, because we'll have updates to the FEMA sleep grant as well as the Easler grant as well.
Yes. Let me know when you have data to share.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, listeners, we're going to drop the mic. We're going to let Joel get back to Casual Friday, and I got to go do stats homework.
Oh, that's fun.
Oh my God. It's so stressful. Thanks, Joel. I hope you have a really great day.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.